This episode of Primitive Culture is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek FM at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the non-profit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org.
This is Tim Russ, Lieutenant Commander Tuvok on Star Trek Voyager, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Open your mind to the past. Oh, this may mean something.
It's a primitive culture. I'm just trying to blend in.
Some people think the future means the end of history. Well, we haven't run out of history quite yet.
Hello everyone, and welcome to a special supplemental episode of Primitive Culture. I'm Duncan Barrett, and unfortunately Tony can't be with us today. He's actually looking after his other half, who's not feeling very well. He's doing his best Tom Paris impression, looking after her, nursing her. But I am joined by a friend of the network, Clara Cook. Hi, Clara.
Hi, Duncan.
And we are in a very special location, aren't we, Clara?
Yes, we are in the South Bank Centre.
We are at the Royal Festival Hall in the South Bank Centre in London. Beautiful, wonderful, gorgeous concert venue. And we're recording here because we're actually here to attend the Ultimate Voyage concert, which, if you haven't heard of it, is a concert of Star Trek music, which we're really looking forward to. But we thought while we were here, we'd try and fit in a little supplemental episode. There you go. I think hopefully you can hear a bit of the music seeping out of the auditorium as we speak. And rapturous applause. Rapturous applause. So anyway, the topic that we thought we'd touch on today, as something that's kind of relevant to what we're doing today, is music in Star Trek, but not so much the kind of orchestral music, the scores, but what people might call diegetic music, essentially the music that is in the real world of the show. It's not being added later. It's not a kind of editing thing. It's not designed to affect your emotions and so on as you're watching it. It's the music that the characters are actually performing or enjoying or listening to themselves. And in particular, we thought it'd be interesting to talk a bit about why it is that so many of the characters in Star Trek have a real passion for music, that they are performers, whether they're singers, whether they play musical instruments or so on. That seems to be throughout pretty much all of the series a kind of ongoing thread and something that's quite important to building up those characters. So that's the kind of area that we thought we might have a look at.
So a question that I had was, what role would music have aboard a starship, knowing that the computer banks of the Enterprise and also of Voyager and presumably of Deep Space Nine are filled with as much information that you could possibly ever absorb in a lifetime? You probably could summon up or search for any piece of recorded music that had ever been played, not just human music but alien music throughout history. And in that context, why would anybody play live music aboard a starship or aboard a space station when you could listen to any piece of recorded music that you wanted to?
It's kind of the same question, I guess. You get, why are they spending so much time rehearsing plays and so on when they could, summon Laurence Olivier on the holodeck? And I suppose it has to be, I guess it partly depends, is it about the quality? Are you just after the highest quality performance? Or is it more meaningful in a sense that it's someone performing it? So, say they're on Voyager, they, again, even though they're in the Delta Quadrant, they have all those resources, they can summon up any performance they want, but is there something, when they have their talent night, is there something more appealing about watching Captain Janeway dance the Dying Swan than some famous, ballerina from Alpha Centauri or wherever they might be? Is it more really about the kind of getting involved, about the kind of putting yourself into it, exploring another side of your character, of your own skills and so on? More that kind of clubbing together, sort of Amdram kind of feel to it, rather than it being so much about a kind of profession and the talent and the ability being the most important thing.
And there is something, I agree with that, but I think there is also something about music being played live as opposed to recorded music. So, and this ties in very much to what we're doing today. We're going to a concert to listen to Star Trek music that we could easily listen to on Spotify or on a digital recording somewhere, but we want to hear it live in an orchestra and a communal experience. We want to hear it live with an audience. And that's something that you see again and again in Star Trek. They have these concerts on the ships because they want to hear it live together. They want it to be a communal experience where they're listening to music together. And this, I started thinking about this when watching Data play music in The Next Generation, and also when watching The Doctor, the emergency medical hologram in Star Trek Voyager, singing. So one of the things that you mentioned was one of the episodes, Virtuoso, which is, I believe, in the 6th season of Star Trek Voyager, where the Doctor is singing for a culture that has never heard music before, and they don't understand what music is. And he tries to explain to them in the first few minutes of the episode what music is and what music means. And he says, it's primarily a form of artistic expression using sounds and images to convey ideas and emotions so that people can communicate their feelings. And that implies that emotion is very much part of music. And you have to question how much emotion you get from a recorded interview. Recorded piece of music. Not recorded interview, because, there's a lot of emotion there. How much emotion would you get from, just an electronic recording of a piece of music that you can get from a computer? Is motion part of what is important when it comes to music? And how does this apply to Data, and how does this apply to the Doctor in Voyager, who essentially are both mechanical beings?
I think there's an interesting question as well, particularly with that episode of Virtuoso. I mean, one of the things about the Doctor is his repertoire of music is quite broad, but you get the sense the music that he really loves is the opera. So in that episode, he starts off singing these old folk songs, but then really quite quickly it becomes the Doctor's kind of opera performances. And I think in Voyager, there's very much a kind of they're using that to kind of tie into this idea of the Doctor's attitude of superiority, his kind of snobbishness, this kind of elitist culture, in a way that is very different. Say, in The Next Generation, listening to opera would seem completely normal. That's kind of because it's such a sort of highbrow setup. That Enterprise is such a kind of highbrow place. By the time you get to Voyager, there's an element of kind of undercutting that and of the sort of pomposity of that. And one of the things that's quite interesting in that episode, I think, is that the Doctor, his proficiency as a singer is very important to him. It's very important to him to sing these very difficult arias and so on, to do them well. But then, of course, what happens at the end of that episode is that he basically gets replaced because the culture that he's singing to, one of them starts composing pieces that are actually impossible for a human voice to sing, and then they create their own version of the Doctor, sort of in their image, but still basically the kind of Dr. Zimmerman physical form, but who can perform these strange alien songs that the Doctor can't perform. So he's kind of, in a way, the kind of snobbery is almost turned back on himself, this kind of idea about being the most proficient, the most talented, having these, prodigious abilities. And it turns out that he's not really up to the job anymore.
Well, that also ties into the idea that being proficient with music isn't actually always the main point of a musical experience, or learning an instrument or playing an instrument. And I agree with you. At the end of Virtuoso, as you said, they produce a better hologram that produces better music, and he's upset about that. I mean, part of it is its pride is hurt, but also part of it is that, was that really the only reason that he was singing? Was it to be really proficient, or was it also because it was an emotional experience for him and he enjoyed it? And in the Next Generation episode, Lessons, this is a really great episode, and it was actually looked on very favourably by critics and by the audiences alike. And it's an episode where you really get to see Picard's love of music, and actually you get to see his insecurities about music. He doesn't want to play his flute in front of people because he's nervous about not being very good. And there's one scene where Lieutenant Commander Nella Darren, who is the character he actually ends up falling in love with, comes into his cabin, and she encourages him to play a duet with her and encourages him to freestyle with the flute. like sort of...
Improv Frère Jacques.
Improv Frère Jacques.
It's like the most kind of tame improv session I've ever seen.
But yeah, and he says, I'm not very good. And she says, well, do you enjoy it? And he's like, yes, I do. And she's like, well, then that's all that matters. And there is something to be said for enjoying the experience of playing music rather than just being brilliant at it. And obviously, you know, in today's world, in the modern world now, where excelling at something is ultimately the goal in so many spheres of life, you know, whether it's excelling in sport, whether it's excelling in making money, or whether it's excelling in like politics or music or art, whatever, that seems like the ultimate goal. But by the time you reach the Star Trek century, shall I say, by the time you reach the next generation, and obviously Starfleet is a lot about excelling, it does seem like people are also doing things for just the pure enjoyment of them. They're doing them just for fun, and especially that's really important, especially in a high pressure environment like a starship, where everything is very mathematical, everything's very scientific, everything's very mechanical and like computerized. And then I guess that would bring us to Data. Data is an example of somebody who is trying to be human, and his playing of an instrument, or playing several instruments, is his way of trying to sort of achieve humanity, amongst other things. But
it's tied very much in with, you know, taking the art classes and other sort of creative, you know, performing in the theatre, other kind of creative pursuits that are tied up with that. And we see it again in Voyager with 7 of 9. We see Janeway trying to encourage her to, you know, try out sculpting, try out art, try out all these other things as kind of a way of, I suppose, sort of broadening your kind of human experience of the world. I mean, I think it's interesting what you were saying about the kind of the passion and the kind of amateur sense of it. I mean, I think that's quite important in a way. I'm just thinking in terms of, say, Harry Kim in Voyager. I feel like I sort of accept that Harry Kim is a competent talent, you know, he's a talented clarinetist. I don't really feel he has any particular passion for it somehow. Do you know what I mean? He feels like someone who's trained and he knows what to do. Someone like Riker, or actually particularly Picard with his flute, you know, he's too embarrassed to play that flute for anyone. He's actually not very good at it. You know, most of the time we see him practicing, he's getting it wrong, he's hitting the wrong notes. I mean, in the Inner Light, I don't know how many decades he spent trying and failing to learn that flute, you know, and it doesn't look like a very complicated instrument. So the kind of implication is that, like, he's actually pretty crap at this, but at the same time it's important to him, he's putting the hours in, he's getting, you know, gradually getting better and so on. And I think that helps us to kind of connect to it, because I suppose the world of Star Trek, it is such a kind of utopian world. They are these kind of perfected human beings, particularly in Next Gen. They're already brilliant at everything. So you sort of need to have a bit of a flaw. And say with Riker, you know, with his trombone, for example, there's that episode where there's a particular piece that he spent 10 years never quite being able to hit the right note or whatever. I think something like that, it's quite important, because otherwise it just seems a bit like these people are just, you know, not only are they brilliant at their job, they're brilliant at all of their hobbies. They're kind of, and with Data, there's definitely that sort of danger that he's so capable of everything. You know, if he plays the violin, he's going to play to, you know, concert standard immediately, kind of by default almost. There's a danger that we lose something. I mean, you were talking about why is it we want to be present in the room, why do we want to be at a concert? It's partly the collective experience. It's also in the same way as why do you go to see theatre rather than a film? There is something, you know, exciting about the fact, it's not just the fact that it can all go wrong, though there is that. I mean, if you go to a play and something goes wrong, it wakes the audience up in a sense, and everyone has to deal with it and has to work their way around that and so on. It's a kind of a reminder, I suppose, that it's happening, it's real, it's, you know, it's in the moment with you. It's not something that's been kind of polished and perfected and kind of mechanically organised. And I suppose the question when we think about Data is, and to an extent the Doctor as well, is that what we're getting? Or are we getting something where essentially with Data in a performance, he's made the decisions beforehand and he just hits play, and then really he's just kind of going through the motions of, you know, whatever sort of broadly speaking creative decisions he's made. Well, I'm going to take a bit of influence from this artist here and a bit of influence from that artist there. But then is he making decisions in the moment? I mean, in Lessons, there's a discussion about the fact that Nella Darren, when she's performing a piece, one of the notes she plays, she deliberately plays a wrong note, I think, because she decides, and they have this little chat with her and Picard about why she decided to do that. And I think the sense there is that that's part of her unpredictable nature. That's her kind of, you know, she says you should get used to surprises while I'm around, basically. That's a kind of token of her humanity. What is the sense when we have these kind of artificial beings performing are they in the moment in that same way? Are they, free to improvise? I suppose that's part of it, and that's part of what's, meaningful about music. Or is it just as mechanical and as kind of by rote as, a CD that you might chuck in your CD player?
I think with data, it is very much a mechanical thing. So I think when a human being plays a piece of music, they're interpreting the notes that they're playing. So it's their interpretation of the piece of music. I think with data, he hasn't really got an interpretation. Like, it's not his playing. It's like a literal translation of the maths of music for him to play. And I think his struggle to become human is sort of mirrored in his struggle to create something that is his own, that is unique, and not a mechanical electronic copy of music. And that his own version of Bach, for instance, or his own version of Stravinsky or something. And when he gets his emotion chip, you notice that he starts singing a lot more. So he sings in the movies, including that very silly little song where he's searching for life forms, little life forms. He sings, and that's like a little tune, that's very human. To make up a little tune off the top of your head about something silly. And when he sings at Riker and Troy's wedding at the beginning of Nemesis, I believe it is, it almost seems like it comes out of the blue. I mean, I suppose he was billed to sing, but he just sort of starts sort of singing, and everyone sort of looks at him like he's just inspired by the romance of the moment.
It's always hard to know with data, though, isn't it? Whether it's... I'm thinking, I was watching recently the episode Starship Mine, where he's experimenting with small talk, and having been very kind of stilted and awkward to begin with, he suddenly adopts this sort of persona of someone who's very kind of gregarious and chatty and a kind of completely different personality. And it's obviously a kind of an affectation that he's put on. And it's hard to tell from that scene in Nemesis, because there does seem to be a similar kind of transition. He starts off quite kind of low-key, and then it sort of goes into a real performance. It's not just a kind of sort of by-the-numbers thing, but at the same time, is that even just just an impression of what how someone else might choose to perform that song, rather than something kind of coming from within it? I mean, I suppose maybe it's impossible to know, but one of the things that strikes me as interesting, was you're talking about the importance of improvisation, of being in the moment and so on. I mean, I suppose that's kind of jazz standard, so there is a kind of element of improvisation in that. And thinking about Star Trek in general, of course, the other big sort of sphere of diegetic music is Vic's Lounge in Deep Space Nine. And there again, because we have this kind of these jazz standards being played, we have this kind of mode of improvisation again. And of course, we have again a hologram who's singing these songs, but very much we're given to understand he's making creative, kind of human, improvisational decisions. He'll direct a line to a given member of the audience. He'll do all of those kind of things that a real singer in a situation like that will do. And of course, we see him duetting with Sisko, and they do this, lovely duet, I think, which is very much in that kind of playful, cheeky, they're having a good time, they're kind of larking about. It's very much not a kind of rehearsed, choreographed, I'm sure it was in reality, but what we're supposed to think is it's very much them kind of riffing off each other and kind of improvising and really enjoying the music and playing, rather than it being about kind of proficiency and giving a sort of serious performance and so on. I mean,
Vic's an interesting character, partly because I personally have never really liked him. I've never liked him, and I've always thought he was a bit of a strange introduction to the show. But in preparing for this podcast, I did actually start thinking about him slightly differently, and I actually rewatched some of the episodes which he's part of, and I realised that he's very much a part of, I would say, sort of like. Well, he's not just there for the music; he's there for advice as well, and the music is part of that. So, especially in the episode "It's Only a Paper Moon," where he's actually providing therapeutic advice and counselling to Nog, music is part of that. So it's actually showing that music has a therapeutic and sort of well-being type of. Mission really or role amongst a crew of people who can be in very stressful situations, like say for instance a war or far from home, or the anonymous sort of soundless expanse of space. So I actually started feeling quite differently about him after that, and I did wonder. I had this conversation, funnily enough, with my own mother about why they chose to have sort of 1960s Rat Pack, big band music in Deep Space Nine. Like, why not Klingon opera, or, why not the Gregorian chant, or, the magic flute? Why not anything else?
Gregorian chant might not be a great kind of place to go out for an evening, in some monastery.
Or why not more modern? I see your point, but why not more modern music? Like, why not like in most recently, like Star Trek Beyond, like the Beastie Boys or something? Like, why not I don't know, trance music or drum and bass or something? My mother made this point, which is very interesting, which she says is that it's about nostalgia, that they want the audience watching Star Trek to feel nostalgia, and they're harking back to a time when probably a lot of the people watching Star Trek Deep Space Nine may be some of the people that were watching the original series, quite likely, in fact, back when they could actually remember being young, or they could remember their parents being young and enjoying this style of music. And the important thing about the show is that people remain people. So even the aliens have to be people. They can't be so understandable, like so strange and so alien that we can't relate to them. And in some science fiction films, and the aliens are so different than human beings that you don't. There are different kinds of stories. They're telling different. There's different kinds of themes. I'm thinking of like the most recent film Arrival, where the aliens are very different from us, or Contact, or even the Alien films. But
the music reflects that. Yeah.
But the stories of Star Trek are very different. They are human stories. So even the aliens have to be a bit human. So that's why they use music like the Rat Pack style music or Vic Fontaine. And the music has to have a direct emotional appeal. And I thought about this a little bit with the original series, with Spock and his Vulcan harp. There's a few scenes where Spock plays the Vulcan harp. There isn't as much music in the original series, and I think they're kind of deprived of music, because whenever somebody starts playing music, they all perk up and look incredibly excited. I was like, they need to have regular club nights or something, or concerts. Spock's music does sound alien, not unpleasant, but alien. And what they do is they couple him with Uhura or with the space hippies. In one of the episodes, they jam out with space hippies, the sort of like beatnik kind of 60s kind of sort of hippie music. But maybe that's why there's not so much alien music in Star Trek, and there's more human music, because music has to have a direct emotional appeal, and you don't need to be part of the culture to enjoy the music, because but it has to be human music for the audience.
Well, certainly when they do produce alien music, I think it often is a bit kind of cringy. I mean, I'm thinking of the Deep Space Nine episode Fascination. We get some Bajoran music, and it's very kind of twiddly and twee, and kind of in that episode maybe there's a kind of, because it's got this sort of strong Shakespearean vibe, I think there's an element of kind of twee, sort of faux Shakespearean music going on there, but it's certainly not something that you feel like, oh wow, I really want to go and listen to that. The Klingon opera maybe a little bit more so. It seems to have a bit more sort of going for it. But I think actually it's interesting when you say about Spock's music reflecting his personality. I think that's one of the things that we see with a lot of the instruments that people play in Star Trek, is that they are very closely kind of tied to their personality. I mean, if you think about, Riker plays the trombone. If you had to say what instrument is Riker, a trombone is pretty much it. It's loud, it's bombastic, it's got this sort of slightly sexy kind of aspect to it. It's quite shiny as well. And it's a kind of, it fits in well, so this sort of booming, fun instrument. Data plays the violin. It's light, it's kind of very delicate, it's very sophisticated, classical, very intricate instrument. I think maybe there's something there that these characters are well matched in terms of how are they going to express themselves through music. And, if it was Data playing the trombone, that would maybe seem strange in some ways. It wouldn't seem to fit in the same way,
Definitely.
And obviously, of course, in the real world, there's an element, clearly Jonathan Frakes plays the trombone. And at some point, someone realised that, and in the same way as they realised that Gates McFadden was a choreographer and therefore could dance, they kind of make the most of that. And I think it is good when they make the most of that, because actually, rewatching Lessons recently, I'd never really watched this closely, but you can actually really see when they're not playing the instruments. There are a couple of shots where you can see that Patrick Stewart obviously has a hand double holding the flute in front of him, and so there are these hands kind of creeping up from the bottom of the frame, and he's got his mouth around the flute, and someone else is clearly playing it, and he's kind of making faces, and there are quite a lot of kind of shots of Patrick Stewart basically kind of mucking along, pretending to blow into this flute. When you're kind of looking out for it, it does come across as slightly ridiculous.
Yeah, when he's acting out Shakespeare, though, it's all genuine, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, that's that's fair enough.
Patrick Stewart can do that.
You can do that, yeah. So it's true. Maybe music wasn't well, the tin whistle or whatever it is wasn't on his CV. Though you think he could learn it. It looks pretty simple.
Yeah.
I mean, famously actors always learn the ukulele because that's like the easiest instrument. You can learn it in a few weeks, and then they'll stick it in any play. They'll stick a ukulele in because so many actors can play it, but maybe that's just not part of his thing. Avery Brooks obviously plays the piano, as anyone who's seen the Captain's documentary will know, and we get a little bit of that sort of bleeding into Deep Space Nine, and his musical performances, which again, I mean, we talked a bit about that duet with Vic. I think there is something about that plays into the kind of eccentricity of Sisko's character and into the kind of the kind of level of... There is a little bit of overlap between Sisko, particularly Sisko the emissary, I think. Sisko the kind of, not the hard-ass Starfleet captain, but the kind of off-duty, maybe, side of Sisko, which is a little bit more quirky and a bit eccentric and so on.
He's quite a wacky
kind of
guy, isn't he? He's got a real sense of humour.
He has, yeah, definitely.
Which you don't see as much as, as you think you would, it's because he's probably got a lot of responsibility.
Yeah. He's got a lot of different elements to his character, I think, but in a way that I don't think they necessarily clash or anything. But I think that gives us a more rounded, interesting character in a way.
One of the interesting things I liked about Star Trek Beyond was the fact that they used the Beastie Boys rather than any other type of music, and that Spock and McCoy actually think it's classical music.
Yeah.
And that Jayla's response to it is, I like the beats and shouting. I like the idea of how our music now is going to be perceived in the future. So will something like Justin Bieber become classical music? And I think originally when I first started looking into the subject, I started questioning why people would still be listening to classical music in in the next generation, and why people would be listening to, Rat Pack style tunes in Deep Space Nine. Like, why wouldn't they listen to some more modern, current music? But then if you think about the music that we listen to today, I mean, like I mentioned the Gregorian chant. Granted, it's not number one on the charts. But choral music is still a very big deal. There's choral music concerts throughout the world, and there's choirs everywhere. And some of that choral music, was composed many, hundreds of years ago, if not centuries. So we may not listen to music that was played in ancient Greece, but we do listen to music that was played many, many years ago and was composed many years ago. So it does make sense that in the future, when we are, although I like to believe when, we are exploring the universe in some sort of ship, that we would be listening to and we would be holding on to our past heritage, and that music itself is something that we won't give up, that for the sake of scientific exploration or for the sake of some other big goal, that we wouldn't forget what music is, because music is a different kind of language, and but it's a very universal language. You don't have to have, like I said before, knowledge or understanding of a particular culture in order to enjoy its music, and that it's a very universal experience, music, and Star Trek is very concerned with universal experiences.
And we see that. I mean, certainly we see in Star Trek aliens enjoying human music. I mean, if you think about Vic Fontaine or whatever, Major Kira seems to enjoy his music, even though clearly that's not something that comes from her culture. That is alien music to her, but she appears to fairly readily have kind of adapted to that. I have to say, I sort of had mixed feelings about the Beastie Boys in Star Trek Beyond. I liked it in the moment. I enjoyed it, and I did find it funny. I found the classical music lines funny. At the same time, it takes me out of the reality of the film slightly, because it's just a bit too much of an in-joke, I think. I felt the same way as I did in Insurrection, where basically Riker gets kind of gamer's joystick to pilot the Enterprise, and it's like, okay, it's a kind of cute joke, but at the same time it slightly undermines the entire scene. around it. I didn't feel the Beastie Boys had quite that effect in Beyond, because it was so. It had been set up, at least. It wasn't totally random, because they'd set it up earlier in the film, and also because it did. I mean, very broadly kind of makes sense that it was relevant to the plot insofar as it was going to achieve something. And you can see they did need a kind of loud, noisy, threshing kind of music for that. At the same time, I do wonder, I do think it's dangerous using contemporary music in something like Star Trek, partly because it's set in the future, but also because hopefully it has longevity. I mean, we're coming to see a concert in the 50th anniversary year. These stories have lasted for 50 years so far. The music has lasted for 50 years so far. What's the Beastie Boys going to seem like in 50 years' time? Is that just going to seem really random? And it's a bit different having the kind of punk music in the Voyage home, because obviously that is in its time, and that's kind of the joke, is that it's tied to that time. But I do sort of worry that it may date the shows. It may sort of make things feel a bit awkward. And they had this debate with Enterprise. They had the network people were trying to get them to bring in a kind of band of the week into the mess hall and have these like boy bands from the charts or whatever, basically performing on the show
like
as a way
terrible
to
idea.
I know, exactly, to like appeal to the teenage audience. But unfortunately, they managed to avoid doing that, or I think that would have been yet another kind of problematic element of that series. But I suppose you do. I mean, it's interesting. They had that idea. They had the idea of wanting to bring music in as a kind of regular part of the show. And I think when we were talking about, you were saying what's the function of Vix, and is it tied to this kind of nostalgic thing? I think there's also an element of just a kind of. Well, it's not. It's kind of akin to like comic relief. It's the kind of the musical relief. It's providing that kind of thing. And I suppose that's what was behind that idea, was this idea of trying to incorporate that on a kind of regular basis. It made me start thinking of Vix as the kind of. Vic Fontaine is the kind of Vonda Shepherd from Ally McBeal of the Star Trek universe. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is this place where everyone goes and they can have montages and play songs that vaguely relate to what they're, what people are going through. But at the same time, I think there is something positive about that. I mean, I like Vic Fontaine as a character. I really like all the stuff in Vix. I kind of enjoy all of that. And I think for me, it's not just the nostalgia. I mean, I understand what you're saying about the nostalgia there, and I can see that that's even more powerful for people who do remember the Rat Pack originally, and for whom and the fact that James Darren was, I think, sort of, at least on the outskirts of the Rat Pack. Do you know what I mean? He's like an authentic. Weirdly, he's not just doing a kind of impersonation of one of those people. He actually is one of those people. But there's also the fact that I think, from my perspective anyway, I work a lot on the Second World War, worked a bit on the First World War. Deep Space Nine is the war series, and I think if you think about both those wars and the music, I mean, so many people I've interviewed, if you talk to them about Vera Lynn, they'll tell you, they don't just see Vera Lynn as, it wasn't just pop music, that was something that kept them going. Do you know what I mean? And they play those songs now with tears in their eyes. This was the kind of that kind of sentimental music, and it is very sentimental. And going back to the First World War, Keep the Home Fires Burning, all these kind of songs, and these quite tough men in the trenches would be really moved by this kind of music. And I think part of that is what you see with Vic and in Deep Space Nine. We do see the kind of music providing a solace to Nog, who's lost his leg. Even to Worf, when Jadzia dies, he turns up at Vix and keeps asking for the same song again and again. There is the idea that in this quite kind of sentimental, quite kind of wear your heart on your sleeve kind of musical repertoire is something kind of healing, and I suppose it does bring people together. It brings out some kind of shared humanity in a way that, maybe classical music or something a bit more of that kind of elitist music that we were talking about earlier that you see in Next Gen particularly, maybe doesn't have quite the same effect. I mean, you can have Sarek weeping over the Mozart concert or whatever, but at the same time, that's quite a private... It seems like that's very much music that maybe classical music... I know you go to a performance venue and say, well, we're effectively doing that today, but at the same time, there's something... To me, it fits very much more with, Picard in his quarters in First Contact. He's listening privately with the speakers turned way up high. We see a bit of that with Janeway as well, but it's a kind of... It's not so much of a collective thing. It's much more a sort of solitary emotional experience, whereas maybe something like Vic, it's much more of a a group thing. There's more of that kind of interplay. It's more improvisational. There's more of the kind of liveness of it there.
I mean, you can't sing along to classical music in the same way. I mean, you can hum, but you can't sing along to classical music in the same way that you can to songs with lyrics, and especially like songs like Vic Fontaine's songs, which have tunes that are, I would say, within the normal range of most people singing. I mean, obviously people might not be able to sing as well as he can, because he can sing very well. He's, is exceptionally good at it.
Unless they're Captain Sisko.
So, I mean, but, you're right, they could sing along. It's more of a communal experience. I would say that the music of Vic Fontaine's is easier to dance to. Showing an example of Kira and Odo, or Kira's hologram and Odo in his way. It's also very romantic music. You were right about that when you said, and classical music can be romantic too, but the classical music in the Next Generation, it doesn't seem to be very romantic. You're right, it's much more of a sort of solitary kind of experience, and I feel
it's proper sort of highbrow. I mean, Captain Picard he's Inspector Morse in space. Do you know what I mean? He's kind of cultured, he's sophisticated. It's all sort of part of his, Renaissance man personality, sitting there reading Shakespeare, listening to Beethoven or whatever. It's a kind of it's sort of selling you something, and it's selling you something that the original series certainly never tried to sell us with Captain Kirk. With Captain Kirk, it's outdoorsy, going out camping and singing "Row, row, row your boat." It's not really about the music, it's about the experience and so on. And maybe with Next Gen, it's something quite different. It means something quite different.
And I think with Deep Space Nine, there was a romantic element. Like you were saying, Worf goes to hear the same song sung by Vic after Jadzia's died. Kira and Odo really actually resolve their feelings for each other using the music that Vic provides. So, and that's something you don't really get in the romances in Star Trek. There's obviously lots of love affairs in Star Trek, especially if you're Captain Kirk or Tom Paris or Riker. But music is not really encompassed in any of those. And if you think about other genres of television or film, a combined love or joint love of music or of a song is often something that does bring romantic pairings together. I liked what you talked about when you talked about, like what you said when you talked about music providing a sort of solace during a time of war or battle. And this made me think of how music has been used in other science fiction series, specifically, say, for instance, in the most recent version of Battlestar Galactica, about how they sing what appears to very much to feel like Irish folk tunes, and even strangely some sort of introduction of All Along the Watchtower.
I found that really that was, for me personally, that was the point where that series of Battlestar Galactica just
that feels jarring to me.
It totally jarred for me.
I feel like
exactly, yeah. And it's interesting. I really tried to give them the benefit of the doubt on it, and I get it was a very brave, bold, strange. I sort of applaud them for doing something that weird, but at the same time, it completely took me out of that universe that I felt had been built up so carefully, and that I really believed in that whole world, and then suddenly something comes in, and exactly because it's not it's because it's diegetic music, because they're all hearing it as well, and you're still thinking, well, what does this mean to them? I found it really confusing. I was sort of trying to get my head around it, because also there's that question with that series: is this happening in the past or the future, or do you know what I mean? And if it's in the past, where's this music coming from? Does that mean Jimi Hendrix is a Cylon? And what on earth does this mean?
Is he a god?
And yeah, exactly. So it's kind of I don't know. I think that was but at least I suppose it wasn't. I mean, when was that? It wasn't whatever was in the charts that week. It was something that I suppose is already, sort of, borderline classic in a sense. In the way that we say Vic Fontaine's songs are, they're standards. So they are kind of part of a sort of repertoire of music that has a kind of longevity, presumably, going forward. So I guess on that level that works, but I mean, well, what about you? I
found it quite jarring, especially because at that point in the series you don't know whether or not they're actually looking for Earth, or whether Earth has already existed and they've left Earth, or that they're human, but you can't understand like where they've come from or what kind of human they are, where they're from. So I mean, when I first realised it was all along the Watchtower, when I first started to realise, I was like, what? Why are they playing this? Why is this part of this narrative universe? I did like the fact, though, that a lot of the music in Battlestar Galactica was, they sing and that they, they hum, and all part of it I did feel like it was almost like sort of Scottish or Irish, like battle music, like the kind of thing I imagine an army singing, almost like kind of the music that you see in movies sometimes, American movies, where they have a funeral for like somebody from the NYPD, the police or something in New York or whatever, and they have someone playing an Irish tune. It seemed very much like that. This is their heritage,
sort of folky.
Yeah.
I suppose you get that in Star Trek with the what's it called, the drummer boy in the Wounded. Is it the Wounded? Yeah. And I think there is something about that kind of folk music, that it has that a sort of raw emotional power somehow. Do you know what I mean? Like, even quite, and I suppose because they're songs that are not to be sung by professionals, they're to be sung by ordinary people. So, someone like O'Brien, you're never going to think that O'Brien is a sort of classically trained sort of professional singer, but at the same time, that's the kind of song that would sort of resonate for him. I was even struck by, I don't know if there's a film called Memphis Belle. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
I mean, which is not, I don't think it's quite a cheesy film, but they use Oh Danny Boy, the song, in that, and they use it quite a lot, and the way they use it is quite cheesy, but at the same time it really hits you emotionally, the punch of that, because again it's that kind of folky, sort of quite simple sort of folky song, and it's been associated with a particular character, and then that character dies and so on. And I was watching it, I was surprised at how kind of effective that kind of simple use of music can be, that kind of very human, very much the opposite of Data playing Stravinsky or whatever, very much kind of music as something that belongs to everyone, as something that is a communal thing, as something that sort of reflects our culture. And I suppose really the question is, what does music sort of represent in Star Trek? And I don't think there's one answer to that. I mean, I think in the episode Lessons, there's very much a kind of music represents love. I mean, in Shakespeare's terms, if music be the food of love, play on. It's kind of there's even kind of double entendre around it. Dr. Crusher says at Picard, "Oh, I didn't know he played duets." There's this kind of idea that music and love are almost interchangeable. In a sense, it's kind of a representative of passion. So I think in that episode there's very much this kind of association between music and kind of passion and romance and romantic love. But I think more generally there's also this idea that music is this kind of token of humanity, of a kind of authentic, emotional of the soul, in a sense, I suppose. And maybe that's why, we raise these questions about Data performing, what it means when Data performs. We talked a bit about Virtuoso. I mean, what the Doctor says at the end of that episode, when they make this superior Doctor who can sing better, is basically, he says, but that won't be me. That, and he says, when I perform, I bring everything I've learned, I bring my whole life experiences to it, I'm inspired and I infuse that into the music. So he's very much seeing it as a creative, that kind of interpretation as a creative act, as something that he is pouring his heart and soul into. So music, in a sense, I suppose, in that sense, is a kind of token of something. It's a kind of something cultural, of something human, of something kind of spiritual. I mean, we do see it, I suppose, like with Worf playing his Klingon operas, there's a kind of, it's a form of cultural expression, playing your own music. Or I can't remember if Kira ever plays any Bajoran music, but I feel there's that kind of element of, it's a sort of expression of the authenticity of that culture, or it's an expression of the kind of authentic self of the individual somehow. It's a kind of a way of sort of defining yourself, of sort of identifying yourself, or of sharing something of yourself in a way that's supposedly meaningful to other people. And I suppose that's one reason why it's a shame that the alien music that we hear is not more interesting. I mean, I think it is often a bit twee, it is often a bit basic. It's often kind of played for comedy, almost. I mean, there's sort of veering towards like the Star Wars Cantina Band kind of, do you know what I mean? Sort of cheesy, jokey kind of, which is a shame because, you talked about films like Arrival, which, use sound and music and so on to really convey something very different, very alien, very unusual. And that can be enormously effective if you have composers and people working on that who know how to do that and are kind of interested in exploring it seriously.
I mean, what's interesting is I do think this is something that other Star Trek fans have thought about, partly because if you go on YouTube and you look up anthems, sort of like patriotic anthems, like the national anthem of a country. You will actually find people have composed national anthems for like the Romulan Empire or the Cardassian Empire or the Bajorans, and actually it all sounds very much like orchestral human music. It doesn't sound like anything that you would imagine alien music to be. But even people have thought, well, what would the Cardassians be singing? You know, and they are a very patriotic culture, very militaristic. Surely they must have some militaristic anthem that they play at official events. So other people have thought about this. I think maybe the writers and the creators of the show did miss an opportunity here to have more alien music in the show. But I also think they missed an opportunity altogether to have more music just in general. And part of that is because, not to take anything away from melodic tracks, but part of that is because of the fact that Star Trek has such a great soundtrack for all the shows and all the films. So part of it is that we are listening to the music that is composed by composers to heighten the action, heighten the drama. So part of it is that we're taken up with that. So it's not as essential, I suppose, to have music within the show played by the characters, sung by the characters. But the more that I started looking into this, the more I started noticing how there is a real absence of it. Knowing how much music I listen to on a regular basis, knowing how much music is loved, beloved and played by almost everybody I know, regardless of ability or knowledge about like the theory of music, it did make me think that it's highly unusual in this situation that people would be listening to music and playing music as little as they do in the series, in the franchise. So I'd be interested to see in the new series, in Discovery, if music will play a part in that as well. Whether they will be listening to music there, or whether they will be... I'd be interested to see if they have any hobbies or downtime, because it looks like it's going to be a roller coaster.
Well, that's the thing. All the trailers and so on that we've seen for Discovery so far, they're so dramatic and so serious and sort of epic, and it looks very exciting. It looks like a really gripping movie. One of the things I'm sort of curious to see, I mean, we get 15 episodes, it's not a full Star Trek season, but it's a decent amount of time. It can't all be like that. It would be exhausting if the whole thing is like that. Are they going to have the kind of quirky episodes? Are they going to have the kind of comic episodes? Are they going to have the... because actually one of the things that appeals to me a lot about Star Trek, I mean, certainly from Next Gen and Deep Space Nine, and Voyager as well, is you get to see the crew on their downtime. It's the Pillar filler. That was the great kind of inspiration of Michael Piller, was that you could just write these scenes that really weren't going anywhere, that were just kind of basically, I suppose, kind of soap opera in a sense. You're just seeing these characters, how they interact, that give you a sense of these people, because they're not at red alert all the time. They can't be. And music obviously is quite an important part of that. So I am curious to see how that plays into Discovery. I mean, we've seen this second trailer, which released only yesterday, I think, actually had a song over it, which was, seemed to, for the trailer, worked really well. I don't know whether that's something that they're going to bring in. I mean, after the experience with Enterprise, you'd think they might steer clear of any kind of, anything like that. But at the same time, it worked well in the trailer. I mean, who knows? Maybe that is something that they'll consider. They've got this kind of new take on the Klingons, which seems much more... I struggle with it a bit. I have a kind of reaction against it, but at the same time, I can see what they're going for. It's much richer. It's much kind of more... even the props and things, I've seen people discussing and saying this is actually what a bat'leth designed by a warrior race with these values would look like, rather than something that's obviously a TV prop. There is a kind of an intricacy to it. So, maybe if we get any Klingon opera in Discovery, it's going to be a lot more alien and a lot more weird and a lot more interesting and so on. And so I'd kind of be interested to see that. But I think it's a good point you make, that maybe there isn't as much listening to music or enjoying music as we might expect, because especially I think being in space, I mean, one of the things that Star Trek doesn't really touch on that much, because their environments are quite comfortable. I mean, if you think about, say, the Enterprise D or something, yes, you're in space, but, it's the Hilton in space. It's a kind of comfortable hotel environment. It's all quite pleasant. It's enjoyable. You're not really up against the kind of stark terror of, existing in a vacuum, basically. But there is that, space is a very silent, a very dead kind of environment. And maybe if you're out there for a long period of time, I mean, we see this touched on, in beyond even the idea of getting lost in this kind of vast void. Music is something that you're bringing something of yourself, you're bringing something of your culture, you're kind of almost enacting your life force somehow through it, and kind of defying that dead, empty, crucially silent environment all around by filling it with sound. And we see that even in real life. We saw the astronaut Chris Hadfield performing David Bowie in space, and that video went viral, received a massive amount of attention. Everyone absolutely adored it because and we do like to see these astronauts because, again, even real world astronauts, we think of them, they do quite serious things. They do this very dangerous job, they do serious science experiments, they go out doing these spacewalks where they could die at any moment, but we always really enjoy seeing them dressing up in a silly costume or doing some singing or mucking around with their food or whatever. These kind of reminders that they are human beings, they have families, they have kind of their own hobbies, they have their own I suppose they're not these kind of super people. And I guess that's maybe that is again part of the appeal of the music that the characters in Star Trek plays. They are these quite sort of elite people, but it's another way of sort of making them more relatable, making them a bit more like us, making it feel like that kind of community spirit that we're talking about is something that includes us and them together, that we're kind of part of that family somehow. Well,
it goes back to what I was saying, was that music is something that is a universal experience, like you said, almost no matter where you are, if you're in the sort of the lonely, cold expanse of space, or whether you're here on planet Earth, it's an experience that we can all share. Which is, I think, one reason why that video of astronaut, enjoying David Bowie goes live, because we can think, well, he's having the same experience with a song up in space,
just in zero gravity,
millions
that we
of
would have had,
that we
would the same
have.
reaction.
And the Star Trek series is all, or Star Trek the franchise, the whole universe of it is all about universal experiences. It's about and what we do in that experience, like how we relate to each other. And the decisions that we make in life, and how all of those can be shared across everybody, regardless of what culture they come from, what background, what planet, that kind of thing. And music fits very well into that.
Absolutely. Well, I can hear the audience starting to return from the auditorium. I think it's going to start getting very noisy out here. I think we were, just to clue the listeners in, we're not recording on stage at the Royal Festival Hall. We're around the back of a corridor, trying to sort of stay out of the way while the matinee performance is going on. So you probably will have heard a few sort of little strains of music coming through. The only time I don't know if you noticed this, once we got into the Michael Giacchino music, suddenly it became a lot harder to concentrate because the volume seemed to increase by about 10 times. But so that's a little bit of background music there for the podcast. But before we go, Clara, why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you on the internet?
So at the moment, I can be found on Twitter at Clara Jean, MC. So that's Clara and then Jean and then capital M and capital C. I can also be found on Facebook as well. I'm part of the Babel Conference. I've joined them. So if you are interested in the Trek FM and you are enjoying it, please do head over to the Babel Conference. There's lots of Star Trek fans discussing all sorts of ideas and subjects over there. And I also have a blog, which is Two Original Geeks at blogspot.com. Which is blogs that I write with my close friends about all sorts of things, stories, science fiction, and also the X-Files.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Clara, for joining me today. It's been great talking about some of the music, some of the passion that the Star Trek characters show for their own musical pleasures and creations. But music on the various starships and starbases of Star Trek is not the only thing we've been talking about this week. So here's a listen at some of the other things you might have missed on the network.
Previously on Trek.fm, Standard Orbit.
And he was supposed to be a teenager, right?
He was.
Because he looked like all teenagers do on television, about 30 years old, but...
Really? You didn't think he looked younger than that?
I mean, I'm 30 now, and I still don't look that old, so... But maybe that's just me. It's all in the genes.
Man, you can't help it, right? When you're that good looking, Zach, you just got to deal with it.
Warp 5.
I just think that's awesome that in this
non-violent way, he's like, "Stop it! I'm inflating my face," and they just kind of disappear. I think that's awesome.
Oh, it's this bizarre defense mechanism that a species is like had. Like, it just makes you think. Okay, so what type of animals were chasing them down and hunting them that they needed this as a defense mechanism, right?
Melodic treks.
And really, the only way I could find out where the next, who was scoring the next movie was looking in the weekend newspaper ads, each weekend for when a new film was coming out, and just looking down the line and saying, oh, they're doing that film, they're doing that film, they're doing that film. And it got to a point over the years I just started buying the scores before even seeing the film, because I started realizing it was the music that I loved more than the actual film.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
So check out all of these shows and join in the conversation about your favourite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple user, be sure to hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts on iPhone, iPad, or Apple TV, or the desktop iTunes app to get the latest episodes as soon as they are published. And please do leave us a star rating and a written review at the same time. If you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, and in most third-party apps, and you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link. If you'd also like to help us keep all our shows coming to you each week, you can become a patron of the network on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/TrekFM, that's patreon.com/TrekFM, to get all the details. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more, available through our special patrons website, the Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce, host, and distribute these shows each month, so we really appreciate any support you can give us, and we hope you'll join the team. Again, you'll find all the details at patreon.com/TrekFM. Duncan and I would love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways for you to get involved and do just that. The best place to join in the larger conversation is the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, B-A-B-E-L, into the search field on Facebook, and it should come right up. If you'd like to send us an email, you can use the form on our website at trek.fm/contact. You can also find the network on Twitter at TrekFM and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. You can find Duncan and I on the Babel Conference as well, and you can find us both on Twitter, Duncan at Barrett's Books, and myself, Tony, at Black Hole Media. And you can also find me hosting my own podcast, the Xcast and X-Files podcast, if you type that into Twitter and Facebook. So thanks everyone for listening to this episode of Primitive Culture. We'll be back soon to discuss more history, culture, and how Star Trek relates to it.
You're blended, all right.